Happy to have you all here. My name is Samantha, and I'm from Parenting Matters, and I'm here with Maya Thiagarajan from TREE. And we are having this session to basically talk to parents of younger children. I think there's been a lot of confusion or questions rather about all the different boards. And so making an educational choice for your child, what works, what doesn't work, what is a good fit. Just to kind of throw light on that and help parents make more informed choices. Yeah, Maya? So I think we can start off with just maybe if you can tell us about TREE and yourself.
Sure. So welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. So I'm Maya Thiagarajan, and I am the founder of TREE. And TREE is an organization that actually works with teachers and schools. So our mission is to support teachers in every way possible. We help them with recruitment to get jobs. We help with training and skill development. And we also, very importantly, have a teacher community where we hold different events for teachers to come together and share thoughts and ideas. We have fireside chats and talks. So really everything for teachers. So if anyone here ever wants to become a teacher, please do contact TREE, because we're always looking for talented and good candidates for the teaching field. So yes, in my own background, I was a teacher for many years. I taught in the US to start with. And then I was in Singapore for 8 years, where I taught in the IGCSE and IB system, but for older kids, for high school. And then started teacher training in Singapore, moved back to India, and have been, started TREE. So that's really my background is very much in education. Yes.
Thank you, Maya. Yeah, and a little bit about me and Parenting Matters, our organization who's working with Maya now for this talk. Parenting Matters works on the side for parents. We offer workshops for parents on parenting with connection. We're looking at building that bond with your child. And we start right off from, now we have a offering for parents who are expectant parents, all the way up to 0 to 9 years, teens and teenagers. We're basically looking at building that connection between parents and children, and based on what is the latest research out there, what is the brain science telling us, and how do we work with children on an everyday basis. So yeah, and we do one-on-ones with parents also. So yeah, that is about Parenting Matters. So this particular, I think, talk or this particular conversation kind of evolved from this question of, again, parents coming to us and asking about what is a good fit for my child, right? When I'm looking at schools and when I'm looking at what school, what board, maybe not even a board, but like which school is a good fit for my child? What do I look at? What are the main points to consider? So Maya, if you could throw a little bit of light on that, especially when you're looking at regular schools, Montessori schools, what is it that parents can be looking at?
So first, I want to say that, in the younger years, up till grade 5, I was just, Samantha and I were just talking about this before the session started. I feel like what's most important is actually not really the board itself, it's the culture of the school. As a parent for young kids, I would really be looking at, is this a place where my child will feel comfortable, where the teachers are nurturing, where learning is happening? So really looking at a fit, not from the board perspective as much as from the culture of the school and the types of teachers, So I think just to preface, before we get into specific boards, of course, it's important to understand the boards and the philosophies as you make your choices. But I really do feel like the most important thing, will the child be happy here? Will the child make friends? Will the teachers be caring and nurturing? Is there real learning going on? Those are the kinds of things I would be looking at first and foremost before I worried about the board. So yeah.
Yeah, so it is about setting that little foundation of a safe space for that child with caring adults and, yeah, looking at the exposure, but also looking at, I think a lot of parents were concerned about literacy skills and setting a strong foundation for their children, right? So looking at that. And as they go further up, though, if they are interested in what is a good fit for my not just what is a good fit, but if they are looking at what are the differences between what are the offerings out there in the different schools and these boards. I think in India we've grown up with the ICSE and the CBSE system, so a lot of us are quite familiar with how those systems function, what is offered, and what it looks like in the school. But just maybe a little bit of the differences on, what's a CBSE school, what's this ICSE school, what is the curriculum like, if you could
So
talk.
I actually have a few slides, which I'm going to share with you all. I'll just, let me see. Hold on. Minnie, can you, wait, I'm just trying to get the slides up.
Yeah, Maya.
Okay. Can you put up my slide presentation? Because for some reason, I think I've got.
Yeah, just a second.
Yeah. Okay. Anyways, I'll get to that, but let me just start by chatting a little bit. So what I think is, as you said, Samantha, we're all quite familiar with ICSE, CBSE, and I think there are some advantages to these systems. One is just clarity. Parents tend to be familiar, which makes them feel comfortable. They are very structured systems. So for kids who need a lot of that structure and for teachers who need a lot of that structure, they work, So I think one big advantage of the Indian system is that most teachers are very equipped to teach it because they've gone through it, they understand it, it's really comfortable for them. And it's a very structured sort of assessment. And yeah, we just go down. Can you just go down to the, yeah. Okay. So this I think is important for everyone to just see, these are the things I'd be looking for in a school first and foremost. Before I jump into a board, this would be my checklist for a primary school if I were looking for my own kids. So, as we think about what is important in a, yeah. So
Especially like even the fourth point of having time to play,
yes.
developing just a love for learning. That seems like a very broad thing, but still that just the approach to, if I'm given schoolwork, how am I enjoying doing that schoolwork? Is it a chore versus, the confidence of, yeah, I can get this done and it's just something I've been given and I'd like to do it, Absolutely. Signs to look for when your child is interacting with the material. Yeah, and having time to play. Like you said, if it's if it's too structured and there's just like one PE class and nothing else, and everything else is sit down and face the teacher and, be a passive recipient. Sometimes that can be also, especially at young age, it can.
And all of this has really doesn't, the boards don't, I've seen schools, CBSE schools where all of this is in place, and I've seen international schools where this is not in place. So really this is, it's about the teachers themselves and the vision of the school and the environment, the culture. So I would look at that first and foremost, because, and a lot of this also as parents, I would say, these are the things that I would supplement with and try to be thinking about as a parent as well, So if you're helping your child with learning, are you reading to the child and helping them develop a love of learning, of reading, that kind of thing. So both in the school and at home, these would be the things that I'd be thinking about. Minnie, can we just go down to the next slide?
Yeah, so come at 10:30.
So this is, I want to just share one thing before we get into the Indian boards. When we're thinking about boards itself, one thing that is important to think about is that, you know, in any school, whether it's an IB school or a state board or whatever school, what gets tested gets taught, you know, and this becomes more and more true as they move into older grades. But really our assessments drive our systems. And so in every system, like what is happening in the classroom is driven by what is going to be tested, right? So I would say when I'm looking at a system and trying to decide what it offers my child, I would look at the assessments, because how you're assessed and what you're assessed on will determine what gets taught in the class, if that makes sense. So I'll give you some examples. So for as we go through, but Samantha had asked me about the CBSE and ICSE, and here
Yeah.
I have, you know, just a couple of things to think about. They tend to be quite content heavy, like kids have to memorize a lot of information, which in the early years can be good because it gives you a wide sort of knowledge base, which can be good. Depends on how it's done in a school. Are they, you know, is it done with meaning, with excitement, or just, you know, memorize tests, the textbook and do tests? One very good thing about the Indian system, I think, is that they generally have a very structured math curriculum. So kids tend to get good math foundations, you know, which is actually, I feel like a really important thing. And I was saying to Samantha earlier, one thing I'd advise parents on is whatever school your child goes to, keep track of reading and math. Because if kids have issues with those areas, then down the road, you know, life will get difficult when they get to high school and middle school. So those are the two areas where, as a parent, you want to make sure you're ensuring strong foundation. You're not getting it at school, whatever school it is, can you supplement in those areas? When you're comparing the two boards, I feel like ICSE tends to have a little more depth, a little more difficulty than CBSE in some ways. You know, they might have slightly more analysis, slightly more literature reading. But overall, both curricula compared to your IGCSE and IB have much less emphasis on analysis, research, presentations, and project-based skills. These are not things that are assessed in these systems in the same way as they are, you know, so because, like I said, assessment drives what's taught. The IB, to a lesser extent, the IGCSE have a lot of assessments that are research-based and analysis-based, and therefore those skills have to be taught, whereas you don't have to teach them in the same way for CBSE and ICSE. So that would be the drawback of these systems, I think.
Yeah, I was going to just ask you, what is the drawback in that for the children when there is less emphasis on this?
And I think, you know, I mean, the world is changing very rapidly. Like content, I still feel like it's important for kids to have a strong knowledge base. It helps them with everything. The more you know, the easier it is to learn new things. But on the other hand, we also really in today's world need to think about skills, because content is very easily available. It's, you know, you just Google search, you get everything. But the skill of knowing how to do research, how to make a presentation, how to collaborate with others, how to find information, how to analyze what you find, you know, those skills are becoming much more important in today's world. And so curricula that are testing that skill, then if it's being tested, it'll be taught, you know. And there are so the IB has a lot of assessments that are testing those skills. The IGCSE has some assessments that are testing those skills. So it, you know, so it is a disadvantage, I think, of the Indian boards over time. I wouldn't worry so much about it in the primary years. I would look more, is the kid happy? Because you can always switch as kids move up the grade ladder, you know. It's not that hard to switch between boards up till grade 5, 6, or even 7, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And when just to add on a point that just coming to my mind, when we're talking about a child being happy, it is about feeling safe in that environment. It's about making strong connections with the caregivers, the teachers, the other, adults in that environment, and being open. So therefore, then being open to the learning and the experience and
Yeah.
all of that, right? It's not just the I'm happy kind of a sense of it, when they feel safety is when they are open to learning. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of.
And a lot of in the early years, it's because the board system tends to really get going in middle school and high school. I think in the early years, it depends a lot on the teachers. Like I have been to ICSE schools that are very, very project-based in the early years, So really I would look at the teachers and the vision of the leadership and things like that for the primary years. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you just move to the next slide? Is she there? Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Um,
So moving on to IGCSE.
yeah, so I would say for me, when I work with teachers in India, most of the work we do with TREE is in and around Chennai and Tamil Nadu and South India. I feel like the IGCSE is a really nice, a really good curriculum for Indian schools because teachers here feel like they can teach it, which matters a lot. Like I think obviously the Indian curricula are very good for Indian teachers because they're all very familiar with it. They know it. They feel competent. IGCSE also, though it's stretching teachers here a little bit, it still feels familiar in a lot of ways for our teachers because there are textbooks, there are exams and assessments. It's still a fairly structured sequential curriculum. So I think they have enough guidance that they feel like they can teach it quite well. Just to give you a little background on the board, it is the international GCSE. So the GCSE used to be called the O levels in England, and they are the kind of school leaving exams developed in England for grade 10. Okay, so all kids there have to take GCSEs. Two boards that offer the IGCSE, Cambridge and edXL. And I would say about at least 80 to 90% of Indian schools use Cambridge. I know very few that use edXL. And the way the curriculum is structured, they have a primary curriculum and a middle school curriculum, and then 9th and 10th grade is when you actually do the IGCSE curriculum, and 11th and 12th grade is when you do the A levels. So that's the way it's structured. And they have a whole very wide range of subjects, including subjects like global perspectives, where the assessment is mostly research-based, things like that. So the other thing, I mean, if you go to the next slide, the other thing about the IGCSE is at the end of grade 5 and grade 8, they have what we call checkpoint exams. These are externally graded exams. So they are purely for the student and the school. They're not, it's not used for colleges. You don't report it to anybody, but it kind of gives schools a sense of, okay, this is where our students are, this is what we need to work on. It gives students a sense of, and parents, okay, some kind of checkpoint of where they are. And to prepare for these checkpoints, they have progression tests, which are all given by the board. And therefore, like I was saying, it feels familiar to our Indian teachers because they feel like there's a very structured assessment system, and what they're expected to do is quite structured. So structured mark schemes, all of these things. And it creates some accountability amongst teachers within a school, to make sure every child has some basic math skills, basic English skills, so that they can do all of these tests. So I actually feel like the checkpoint exams are quite useful in terms of holding schools accountable for basic skills, and they help teachers a lot. So teachers know what to teach, how to teach, that kind of thing.
Where the student might be, what is the state of the student, and then how to help them forward, either ways. Yeah. Okay.
I mean, the downside, of course, is testing can be very stressful for kids, but I
Yeah.
do like what happens when you don't have some kind of a checkpoint system is you will have some kids who, if they're say they're struggling with math or they're far behind in reading, the teachers, if you don't have a system like this, the teachers might just pass them on and say, okay, they'll be fine down the road. And then suddenly they get to grade 9 and there are lots of issues because their foundations are so weak. So this, at least for reading and math, gets, forces teachers to make sure every child is able to do these exams, or it raises flags if they're not able to do it. So there's some accountability in the system that comes from these exams,
Yeah.
and they're only in English language, math, and then a kind of combined science exam that they have. So,
I see.
yeah, so that just gives you some sense of the IGCSE curriculum. I would say it's a midpoint between the Indian curricula and the IB. It's less creative and holistic and 21st century than the IB, but more analytical, research-based than the Indian curriculum. But it still has that structure and exam system that teachers here feel very comfortable with. So,
Not just
I
the
do
teachers,
think,
right? I think the
yeah,
parents also, because we grew up in a
parents
system,
also.
right? So when you're looking at a system which might not have any of this, right? Where you do say, okay, where's my child at? What is it that we're discussing?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
how do I know that he's progressed? Hi, everyone. If you could just mute yourself. So yeah, I think for a lot of parents, it's gives that sense of, okay, I know what's going on, and like you said, for the teachers, if they have checkpoints like this to say, okay, I see where he's at, I see he's doing well, or maybe needing some help. So
Yes.
yeah, I can
Yeah.
see the advantage of having that put in place.
Checkpoints. Yeah. So these are, and they're externally graded. So they, so this is how Cambridge is looking at things. So it helps a lot. If you just go on to the next slide, Minnie. Is she there? There we go. Yeah. So again, this is just, like I said, what I like about the IGCSE, if you look at the checkpoint exams, they tend to be far more application oriented. And like the English exam, for example, you'll get, kids will get extracts that they've never seen before, and then they have to answer questions analytical, what differences they make. Can you all please mute yourselves? Thank you so much. So they're a little bit more analytical, application oriented, especially for the science and the English, than a typical, say, CBSE exam would be. And also, most kids will do a course called Global Perspectives, where this is not externally graded with checkpoints, but in grades 9 and 10, it's graded almost entirely through research. So, you have to do a major research paper and then some kind of presentation, research-based presentation. So the exam board is trying to make sure they get some analysis and some research skills, over the years. So those are, I think, advantages as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So
yeah.
Any other questions, Samantha, about IGCSE before I move to IB, which I know a lot of parents tend to have questions about?
Not really. Should we just ask the parents themselves if they have any questions? There might be parents whose children are already in schools that are doing the IGCSE board.
Yeah. Any questions about IGCSE versus CBSE, ICSE?
You can either just unmute yourself and ask, or you can put it in chat and I could read it out.
Chat box. Yeah, we can put it in the chat box.
Hey, my name's Priya. I just wanted to check in terms of the IGCSE board, the checkpoint that you just mentioned, is that like a necessity, or, is it okay if the child just progresses towards because that's going to be another exam that you kind of need to give when the kids are already pretty resistant to exams. So I'm just wondering whether that is a necessity, or is it okay, when you kind of progress forward without doing the checkpoint?
And that's a really good question. It's actually an optional thing, right? So for a school, the school can either choose to administer checkpoints or not administer checkpoints.
Oh.
Now, what I would say is that, see, I'm thinking of this really from a school and teacher perspective, because we work with teachers.
Mhm.
I feel like they hold teachers accountable, because, like, I'll give you an example. When I was teaching, if I knew that my students had some sort of externally graded exam, and then the results would be a reflection of me, I would make sure every single child had, mastered those skills.
Understood.
Whereas if you don't have that, if you're teaching in a middle school without any of that, it's very easy to say, okay, yeah, this kid is really struggling, but you know what, they'll figure it out down the road. Let's not make a big deal. Let's not stress everyone out. Let the child go on. But then what happens is they get to 9th grade and suddenly everybody's like, oh my God, like this child is so far behind, and they're getting, so I feel like from a teacher perspective, having these kinds of checkpoints at the end of grade 5 and grade 8 do create some accountability in the system. They force teachers and parents to say, look, if there's a problem, we have to confront it. If there's a problem with math or reading, we have to confront that. And we
Maya,
can't.
don't go there.
Minnie, I think your email is up here. But Minnie?
I
Not
think
sure.
screen sharing, Minnie.
Yeah. Minnie, I think you've got your, okay, anyways, let's, oh, there we go. Okay. So, yeah, so I think it does create a sense of accountability. What a school ideally should be doing is they should have checkpoints, but they shouldn't make it a hugely stressful thing, because really it's just there to check, are the kids on track and are the teachers doing what they're supposed to do? And if there's an issue, can we flag it early instead of waiting till it becomes a massive issue in grade 9 or 10? If we know a child is behind and struggling, this way you can give the child that extra support when the stakes are still low. So I feel like it's a good thing to have, but it shouldn't be the thing it shouldn't be like a huge thing in the school where everything is only about checkpoints and exclusion of all else, and that everyone is utterly stressed about it. They should be treated as a diagnostic, which is what they actually are supposed to be. So if a parent can think of it as a diagnostic, instead of getting very stressed and saying this is some sort of major result, if you can think of it as, it's good to do this because then I know if my child needs support that I can, find a maths tutor or give them the support they need. I can diagnose where the issues are. So I think to answer your question, I would say it's probably good to have, but it has to be done more in a diagnostic way.
Yeah, understood. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Yeah, there are some questions on the chat thing, and I'm going to actually piggyback on what you just said, because one of the parents, Shubha, is asking that if they do the checkpoints, how is that information from the checkpoint used? Like you said, now it could be used as a diagnostic tool to help the child. So she's asking, assuming that the child has not met the requirements, what happens then? So are the teachers equipped to guide the children? What is the advice to parents then?
Yeah, so I think there are two ways of looking at this. One is from the school and teachers' perspective. So a school, when a school gets their results, they will look at it, and if there's one particular subject area where their kids are lagging. So for example, one school I was just talking to last week, and the principal was saying, we're very behind in English. Our kids have done really well in the checkpoints in math and science, but English is where we need help. And so now they're looking at, okay, how do we get extra training and support for our teachers, and how do we make sure we strengthen the English program? So one way that it's really useful is that the school itself gets data on what they need to work on. Now, they also they'll get very specific data on each kid. So they'll be able to identify students that need a little bit more intensive intervention or support. And as a parent, certainly when you look at that data, if you say, okay, my child has not is really not doing very well in math or whatever it is, then you can also, and I would really advise parents in those cases to say, how do I support the child in that area? Maybe I find a tutor, maybe I go talk to the teacher about it and say, look, how do we work together to create a plan to support this
Yeah.
child? And to be very, very honest, sometimes for a teacher, if you're teaching 20 kids, 30 kids, it's tough to give that individualized attention to each child. So as a parent, if you can see that there's an issue, you may want to then say, okay, how do I supplement? How do I help the child myself at home also? And kind of work with the teacher. But I think that data is useful from that perspective to, so as a
Yeah.
parent, instead of panicking, you should actually say, okay, it's only grade 5. It's not that big a deal. We've got a lot of time, but I want to make sure I work with my kid on, her math skills so that in grade 8, she's better and then she's ready for 9 and 10. So
Yeah.
it's,
Yes.
I think,
Yeah. Sorry. No, go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Samantha. Sorry.
No, I guess it's also in a sense that conversation with that teacher would be about putting a plan in place about how to get this support to the child. So that's a very constructive conversation that can be had at that point.
Yes.
One other question we're having is, if besides these checkpoints, are there any other assessments that are done if the school decides not to do the checkpoints? And is that a choice? Can the parents then ask that the school do the checkpoints?
So the school will make the choice, and I guess
Okay.
parents always have a voice in any school, but the school, it is optional. So it's really optional for a school to decide if they're ready to do checkpoints or not. And some
Okay.
schools will do checkpoints only in grade 8 because they feel like grade 5 is too young. They don't want to
Early.
put that kind of pressure on kids. So it really is up to the school. If they don't do checkpoints, most schools will do some sort of testing to make sure kids are on track. And I think, it's as a parent, just making sure that you're looking at whatever testing is done in school, looking at it as diagnostic data, right? What does it, how should I support my child based on what is happening? So not getting panicked or anxious, but really just thinking, okay, if this is the result, what do I do to help the child? But yeah, it is an optional thing in schools. Most schools here do checkpoints, I think. Some schools, when they first start the IGCSE program, they don't, because they want to give teachers and students time to adjust. They don't want to, and they're worried that if the first round of results are bad, everybody will panic. And so they kind of give some time for everyone. So it depends on the school. Yeah. I think there was one more question.
Yeah, there are a couple more questions. I think one parent, Sujita, is asking, if I'm getting this question correctly, Sujita, that the IGCSE, I think it's about the qualification of the teachers that are brought into are they trained in the system once they've been hired into the system? Is there specific IGCSE training that is done, and are there enough teachers with that training?
So I would say that, like I said, IGCSE is a little bit easier for teachers to adapt to in India because it's fairly structured, assessment driven, all of that, and their textbooks, very clear mark schemes for everything. So I do feel like our, teachers who move from an Indian system to IGCSE usually do okay. English is probably the area where they have the most difficulty because it is the English system is maybe more different from CBSE, but Cambridge has some required trainings. They're not super useful for teachers because they're quite short. There is a longer course that teachers do, a 6-month course in pedagogy that Cambridge offers as well. And then, like organizations like ours, we do a lot of training for teachers for IGCSE. So I think my sense is that most teachers are able to handle IGCSE, and the two areas that might be difficult for them it would be English and global perspectives, because those are quite different from the Indian system. But we're seeing more and more good teachers in those areas as well. So I think, yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if that totally answers your question, but
Yeah, I have one more question.
yeah.
So my daughter is in CBSE. I'm thinking of switching to IB or IGCSE. So now my question is, there is a belief that the kids who are trained in Indian system, they are very much equipped for the exams conducted like NEET or JEE and all this stuff. And for IB and IGCSE, they are not very well equipped for these kind of exams and going for further for colleges. So
Yeah.
what do you think about it? Or is it good for the kids who is planning for abroad studies? Or is it okay for the Indian system as well?
Yeah. So a couple of things here. I would say you're right. If you're thinking of NEET or these engineering exams, I think a CBSE school is probably your best bet because the whole system is geared towards all those exams. And there's space in the system for students to do the extra classes, so it's all sort of aligned. I would not recommend the IB system if you're thinking of NEET or engineering for multiple reasons. One big reason is in the IB diploma program, you typically you can only do up to 2 sciences in the 11th and 12th grade. So whereas you might be required to do all 3 sciences for NEET, so that becomes a little difficult. And it's the IB in grades 11 and 12 is very rigorous, and so it's really hard to combine with these kinds of programs. So I would say if you know your student
Hi,
wants to, can
could
we
you
have
just
everyone mute yourselves? I'm so sorry, but it's very distracting.
you?
So yeah, if you know your child wants to go into one of these systems, then I would say stay with CBSE. That would probably be better.
How do you charge this iPad?
sorry, I'm just
Yeah. Because
Thank you. Yeah, got your point actually.
yeah. So
and Maya, we were also discussing that it might be, I think when you and I were talking, we were talking about how it might be difficult, I think especially in the primary years to look at, that the thing of
Yeah.
going all the way to 12th grade and seeing what your child might be, interested in and what kind of drawing that line to colleges and, so maybe to focus just on, like you said, that foundation of which school is giving that very strong foundation for students, and then maybe looking in 5th grade if you want to make that switch, right?
Yeah, exactly. I do feel like parents very often, I've had parents of children who are 4 years old will come to me and start talking about college. And really, you have no idea at 4, even at 15. I mean, my son is 19 and still trying to figure out exactly what he wants to do with his life. I think it takes some time to understand what a child is good at, what they're interested in, what kind of a kid you have. And so having college drive all decisions when they're very young can actually be, I don't know, it can sometimes backfire because you don't want to have a pre-chartered course and say this child is going to be an engineer, because you don't know, maybe that child is really much more artistically inclined and really doesn't want to do engineering, and trying to fit a child into something that you think is optimal for the child when it's not a good fit can be difficult. So I do think while once you get into grade 6, 7, 8, then you do need to start thinking about this for sure, because if you have a kid who seems very STEM oriented, they want to do engineering, you're thinking about that, the child is on board, then a CBSE curriculum would make sense if they want to do engineering in India. But in up till grade 5, I feel like there's still a lot of flexibility, and you can switch between boards up to grade 5 without much problem.
Yeah. So then just talking about, or would you like to like finish shedding light on the IB curriculum, and then we can look at that shifting between boards and how easy or difficult that might be?
Oh, sure. So I'll just introduce the IB because I know a lot of people have questions about it. So the IB has 3 programs. Actually, they have 4 now, but we are going to look at 3 because only 3 are offered in most of our schools here. In the primary years, they have what they call the PYP, which goes through grades 1 to 5. It is completely assessed internally. There are no external assessments of any kind. It's very project-based. So really, it's not a assessment driven like a traditional Indian school or even an IGCSE school. And the big culminating assessment is in grade 5, and it's an exhibition that they put on for the public, okay, on a particular topic. They do these projects and put on an exhibition. Is everyone else seeing a yellow bar on the slide?
Yeah, I'm also
I don't know
seeing
where.
that.
Yeah. Minnie, I'm not sure where that's coming from. Anyways, I'll just talk through it. There's middle school, they have a program called the MYP, which is the middle years program. And that goes through, like grades 6 to 10. And again, they have a personal project at the end of grade 10, which is externally graded, but everything else, it's mostly internally graded. And then there are optional e-assessments now. So there is this option that they've put in place to kind of create that accountability, because they felt like many schools were asking for more assessments from outside. And then the DP program, the diploma program in 11 and 12 is a very, very rigorous, actually started as a gifted, program for gifted kids, but now every child seems to be doing it. But it's a very rigorous program with a lot of research in it. So it's like doing, first or second year college in the US, first year college courses with tremendous focus on research. So that's the IB program across the board. Now, the advantages to the IB is it's a very 21st century kind of curriculum in terms of the skills that it's trying to measure and teach, So that, I'll just tell you a little bit about the PYP, since we are mostly primary parents here. The way it's structured is quite different from your other curricula, because it has literacy, numeracy, and then instead of science and social studies, and it has these interdisciplinary units of inquiry. And these are thematic units that cover different disciplines and involve project-based assessments. So it's a very creative curriculum. It's very experiential, very project-based, no traditional tests and exams that are prescribed by the IB, though the school may have some. And then at the end of grade 5, they have this big exhibition where they exhibit research projects and real-world applications around a theme that they've chosen as a school. So that's how the PYP works. Minnie, can you go to the next slide? So anyways, I'll tell you a little bit about what a unit of inquiry would look like. So here there's a sample one. So say students are looking at water. They would have essential questions. So the teacher would frame big questions about, why is water essential and important in our lives? Why and how? What is the science behind water? And they'd have these big questions, and that they call lines of inquiry. And then they would basically look at water from all different disciplinary perspectives. So they might do experiments on the water cycle and make charts and presentations about it. They might, my children actually did this when my son went through this unit. So when he did the PYP, and they each had to look at the relevance of water in a community and do research on it, and then create these little mini videos or films and share it with the class and the parents. They had to do a whole thing on how they're going to conserve water as a class and then share it at an assembly. They wrote poems on water and illustrated it. So you're looking at water in all these different ways. And, so the interesting thing about this curricula is it's very, very interesting, but it's very teacher dependent.
Yeah.
So if you have a good teacher, we at the time when my son was doing the PYP, we were in Singapore, and he had a fantastic teacher who did a really good job with this. If you have a good teacher, it can be amazing because it's so rich with possibility and opportunity for teachers. But if you have a teacher who doesn't understand PYP and project-based assessments, and it can become a lot of fluff or very superficial also, because it's really teacher dependent. So that is both the good thing about the PYP and the bad thing, depending on the teacher and the school. If you have good teachers, it can be fantastic. If you don't, you really have to be careful about what your kids are getting, I think.
So then just kind of a question on that though. So if, are there, does the school have the like the training for the teachers? Say a teacher comes in from a CBSE board and is not very familiar with the IB board, but has the potential, so to speak. Is there, training offered, or is that a
Yes.
choice of the school? Is there enough resources out there?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. The IB requires teachers to do these short workshops. So it's like 2 to 3 days. But really, for many of us, the IB assumes when a teacher comes into the workshop that they already have research skills, they already have good analysis skills, and they already have some understanding of project-based learning. So the assumption is that all those things are in place when you come in for the workshop. Now, what we typically see in Indian schools is that those things are not in place at all, because our CBSE teachers have never written a research paper in their life. They've never had to work on citations and organizing research, and they haven't made these kinds of presentations. They haven't done this kind of thing themselves. So I feel like for our teachers, of course, there's a wide range. We do have some highly creative, amazing teachers who just love this kind of stuff and can go with it. But for the majority, I would say they need a lot more training. In fact, one of the things we do at TREE now is we actually have a program where teachers themselves have to do research projects. They have to write a literary analysis paper because they can't teach these skills if they've never done it. And they just, unfortunately, even at the college level, they're not taught in India, So,
Yeah.
but these skills are super important for kids in the real world today. I mean, once a student goes into the workforce, they're not going to be taking close-ended exams. They're going to be making presentations. They're going to have to do research. They're going to have to do these kinds of things. So, we, I think as a society, need to bridge that gap, and it's just starting to happen now with this cohort of teachers and students. So, yeah. So,
Wonderful.
the advantage to the IB is it's a very creative 21st century curriculum. The disadvantage is that many of our teachers and schools are really not equipped for it. It's very teacher dependent. And because there are no external assessments prescribed at all, it's more of a framework that the IB gives you as opposed to this very prescribed curriculum. Sometimes there's a lack of accountability in the system, So as a parent, I would say, if you're sending your child to a PYP school, you may want to supplement for math, and you may just to make sure they get those math foundations, and you may want to just be a little aware of what's happening so that, you can see, is there real deep learning happening? Because it should be happening, but again, it's teacher dependent a bit more,
Yeah, if they're doing projects, then, and it's supposed to be an interdisciplinary thing, are those connections being made for the children between the disciplines when they're talking about water or when they're talking about the weather or whatever, right? The connections. Yeah, I do.
But more than even the connections, are the skills being broken down? So, for example, very often we'll have teachers who will tell kids, go do research on water. And now a child will then copy and paste a lot of stuff. And then the teacher will be like, oh, these kids are doing, look, they don't know how to do research. But the reason is they've never been taught. So what teachers actually need to be doing in an IB school would be teaching students, okay, let's look at what makes a good site, to use. How do we evaluate a site? Have a lesson on that. Now let's look at, okay, now we've got these 2 sites that we know are good. How are you going to read it? write notes on it in your own words, and then citations for what you're doing. We're
Mhm.
breaking down those research skills into bits so that a child understands what it means to do research, and so that they have a product that actually, is high quality at the end. So a teacher has to break down these assessments or projects into smaller bits where the skills are taught. And that is the part that I think our teachers really need to work on. So for an IB-PYP school, if your kid is in an IB-PYP school, how much is all of that happening? And if it's not happening, as a parent, can you supplement? Can you talk to the teacher about it and say, so I don't want to be negative about PYP because my kids went through it and I think it has some amazing benefits. But I do want to point out that many of when I look at our teacher community, I feel like obviously the Indian school curricula are very comfortable for them. The IGCSE, they're able to handle. IB is a really mixed bag, I think, in terms of how well teachers are able to handle it. Because it is a very different kind of curriculum from what people are used to, and they need a lot of training. So if a school is investing in a lot of training, then it should be fine. But you could ask your schools, how much training are the teachers getting? What kind of training are they getting? Because for the IB, they do need to be investing in that a lot,
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
actually my next question in terms of, so how I'm looking at the information you've presented, because now it's like 4 different things, right? Is for parents for young kids when they're making these choices. So for CBSE and ICSE to see that it's not just about the textbook and the content, and if they can be creative as they're building the literacy and numeracy skills and kind of opening things out for the children.
Yeah.
In IGCSE and IB, I see it's more about the parents asking the question of, are these skills being built and are the teachers trained well enough into the system and into the way of, working with the curriculum for the children, right? Am I getting that correctly? So asking that question to the school. So here asking the questions of, okay, what about playtime? What about project-based, what about inquiry-based? And here asking about how well are your teachers trained? What is the training you're investing in? And so on. Yeah. Okay.
And one other thing I would say, especially for, I guess at all levels, but in primary school particularly, there is no perfect school. I mean, I've worked at schools around the world, some of the top schools, really brilliant schools, and no school is perfect. And you're always going to have a wide range of teachers at any school. But what I think as a parent you have to do is if you agree with the philosophy of the school and the culture of the school and you feel connected to that school, then you have to say, okay, what is the school doing really well? That's great. What is the school not able to do? How do I supplement at home a little bit? And if you're in a school, for example, a CBSE school, and you feel like, they're good with the math, they're giving my kid is happy, but I don't feel like there's much creativity. Then how do I do more of that at home? How do I help them just read for pleasure, give them more free playtime, maybe enroll them in an art class? How do I supplement for creativity? Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you send them to a really alternative school where there's a lot of space for creativity, but you're worried that, what math foundations are shaky, I would say then supplement for math and do some kind of structured math program at home to kind of to bridge that gap, But as a parent, just looking at what does the school offer and what does it not offer, and then kind of bridging that gap. And I think you have to do that no matter what school your child goes to, because like I said, no school is perfect, and every school has its strengths and its weaknesses and has a range of teachers, and teachers are human. You might have a teacher who's really good one year, but then the next year she's going through a divorce, or she's lost a spouse, or something has happened, and so her teaching kind of falls apart. I mean, there are just so many variables that as a parent you do need to advocate and be on board with what's happening to build those foundations and offer the support and that a child needs. So yeah.
And then I think we are almost coming to 10 o'clock, but the bit about that switching, how easy it is and how okay it is to do it at 5th grade, switching between boards. If you could just talk a little bit about that.
So I think switching between grades in middle school is totally possible. I know a lot of kids who do make that switch quite successfully. So I wouldn't worry about it at all. I would say that, regardless of which school your child goes to, make sure that math foundations are in place and reading is in place. If those two things are in place in primary years, then switching is not going to be an issue at all. Because really, that's all that a child needs to come into in any curriculum to be successful middle school and high school. I do think that it's easier to make a switch from an Indian curriculum to a international one, because what's harder is to go from a more creative curriculum to a more rigid one. If you're used to doing a lot of independent thinking and analytical thinking, and then suddenly you're told, no, you just need to memorize it and do it as the textbook says, a child might rebel and say, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why should I just write what the textbook says? Why can't I think for myself? Why can't I analyze myself? So they may feel like it's a little bit of a regressive shift. So in that sense, I think shifting from an Indian system to a international system is an easier switch to make. Not that it can't be made the other way around either, but it, to me, seems like a more kind of makes more sense as a shift to go from more structured and rigid to more independent thinking, as opposed to the other way around, but I do feel like it's totally possible to make the switch. So, I mean, one piece of advice for primary parents is that you don't need to worry so much. You can make switches in middle school without a problem. It becomes harder definitely after grade 8, because like the IGCSE curriculum and the IB curriculum will start to assume that you know a whole lot of things that in terms of research skills, or even things like how to use a graphing calculator. The technology they use is different for exams, things like that. So, I know kids find a lot of that difficult if they switch in grade, if they
8 and
make
above.
switches in high school. Yeah, I mean, it's still not impossible. A lot of kids will switch even after grade 10, and it's totally not impossible. It's absolutely doable. So, yeah, my big advice is don't worry so much about it, because these switches are very possible. Yeah.
We do have one question about
I like this question, actually. Learning difficulties. Which
yeah.
method of education is best suited for students with learning difficulties? I think it depends on the type of learning difficulty that you have. Because, so I will say this, a child who has learning difficulties, the IB is not well suited for, especially in the high school level. Okay. People may think that because it's more international and project-based, it's a lot easier, but the IB diploma program in grades 11 and 12 is a very rigorous program. It's really tough for kids. And there's really not much space for a student with learning difficulties. Now, one thing about programs today is they have these accommodations, so even for IGCSE, for example, even for IB, for all boards now, you can get extra time if you need it. You can use a laptop if you need it. So there are accommodations that children can get, but that still doesn't really solve the problem of kind of understanding, or depending on what the learning difficulty is, I know now that even in Indian boards, if you actually want to drop maths, for example, you can drop it in high school. So there's flexibility in these boards in terms of subjects and accommodations. But I would say if your child really has severe learning difficulties, or depending on the type, you might want to look at NIOS, which gives you a lot more flexibility, and it's really designed for flexibility. So, yeah, I think that question, I need to know a little more about what kind of learning difficulty to really help you answer it a little bit better.
Yeah. And wouldn't it also again come back to the teacher, and the teacher being able to support the child in the classroom,
Yes.
understanding the learning difficulty and kind of working the curriculum with that, besides the accommodations that can be had. So the accommodations, I think, she's mentioned specifically for dyscalculia, which is connected to math learning.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I would say probably your best bet would be, if a child is going to drop math in high school, you have that option in the Indian system boards. I think you can, ICSE, for example, allows you to drop math in 9th and 10th. IB does not. You have to do math, and pretty high level math. Even their lowest level of math in 11th and 12th includes calculus, and nobody can do the full IB without math. So IB would not work at all. IGCSE A levels probably would work. I think one thing to look at is, can you talk to the school about what are the
What systems?
interventions in place or support systems in place? Do they have learning support teachers? What kind of learning support do they have? Really talking to them about how much they can help a child, right? Okay, someone's asked, what is IGCSE A level? They're actually two different exams in the same system. So the Cambridge system, the UK system, IGCSE is the 10th standard exam. So it's your grade 10 exam. 11th and 12th, you do the A levels. So A levels will be taken in grade 12. IGCSE leads into A levels. So it's like an ICSE versus an ISC. 10th standard ICSE, 12th standard ISC, 10th standard IGCSE, 12th standard A levels.
Yeah.
Other questions like that, just logistical, because I know it is very confusing, and we've gone through a lot of information very quickly. So any other questions of that nature?
I think there are some questions about,
So-
admissions into colleges, although the kids are really young, but looking at just like which board would be more suited for if you're looking at admissions to colleges abroad.
Yeah. Honestly, I think to get into a college, any board is fine, because colleges are usually open to all boards. To be equipped for a college abroad, to make that transition easier, an international board might be a little easier.
Easier,
So,
yeah.
but to get in, if the goal is just to get the child in, I think CBSE also works well. Like a lot of kids do get in with ICSE, CBSE, no problem at all. But then once you
Like
get
our
to college, if you're
generation.
yeah, exactly. There'll be a little catching up time, when you get there and you suddenly have to do research and you have to be able to cite your sources and things like that you haven't been taught so much. So it's the catch up in the first year at university that will be a little harder.
So, sorry if we have time for a last question. I mean, all this, if I can ask a
Sure.
broader question. In terms of, we've been talking about switching curriculums if the child knows what they want to do, etc. And what Sam said, in our generation, it was just broadly, there was no IGCSE also, right? It was more state
Yeah.
board and central. And then IGCSE has come in. I'm sorry, ICSE came in, and then IGCSE, and now IB. So
Right.
I mean, obviously those are progressing, and there are a larger group of students slowly, though they may be lesser in percentage, are going into these other curriculums, which we are right now calling alternate, right? So at some point of time, the education policies and systems, you don't think there will be any kind of a cognizance that there's a huge group of students who we are probably just saying that they don't fit into India because of the exams, entrance exams. And I mean, there is no sort of policy discussions on this in terms of how can we incorporate any child in from any board into example if they want to take an IIT exam in India, do they necessarily need to switch in order to be equipped, or are say IITs recognizing that there are many more kids coming in, so why sort of make them switch in order for them to be more equipped to take the exams? Why can't an IB student continue to do an entrance exam in India, which is a competitive exam, which say a CBSE student is able to?
So I'll give you an example. My son, when he did the IB, there was a student in his class who also did the NEET successfully and is now in medical school here. So it's not impossible. But I do feel like the way the Indian system is structured, there's this expectation that you're doing all these extra classes for those entrance exams, right? And so the CBSE kind of allows that space for those extra classes. Whereas if you're doing the IB and you're doing these massive research projects in every class, for every course you're doing, you really don't have the time to study for the extra entrance exams. It's pretty much, it would be like brutal for a child, this. So I think I think part of it is that the IB is not thinking in terms of, they're assuming all you're doing is the IB. It's a board from from Europe, and they're not thinking in terms of these competitive entrance exams. When they create the IB system, they're assuming that students are just doing that, and and it is based on this very holistic idea where you have to do a humanities. You have to do a foreign language, you have to do 6 subjects, you have to do an extensive research project on your own called an extended essay, and you have to do a philosophy course called the Theory of Knowledge, where you write essays about what does it mean to know things and what is knowledge and these kinds of questions. So it's really a very holistic course, and trying to combine that with studying for a IIT exam would be, I think, be torture for a child, so I don't think, the way the IIT exams are structured, they're quite narrow. They're just engineering exams. They're not looking at, is this child a well-rounded child? Can they make presentations and do research? Can you do math and physics? And so it's, they're just different. You can't combine the two very easily at all. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but the problem I think that we have in India is that our entrance exams require a whole different education that has to go parallel to the school education.
I got it, but that's also something that it's been created by us only, right? It's years of it being created by the same educators and institute. So I'm saying you don't see any sort of policy shift or our educators thinking about the fact that there are other ways of educating children from really young age, like Montessori, for example. It never really took off very largely in India, probably for the same purpose, right? So, things like that. What are your thoughts on it? Why can't everything coexist in a at some point of time? I'm not saying immediately. These obviously probably take years to evolve. But are they coexisting in any other country? Or is that because India is highly competitive? It's very difficult to kind of break this mold.
Yeah, I think the way our exam structures are set up, it is difficult to break. And partly it's also because, one of the things that is problematic perhaps about the IB or something is when you think about exams, right? Exams are in a way the antithesis of creativity, because there's always a right answer. It's always objective. You cannot ask a question on an exam. You cannot come up with an original idea on an exam, right? It's very much, you can't collaborate with other people on an exam. So in a way, exams, as we traditionally see them, are the opposite of what we say we need in the 21st century, in a way, right? We're saying we need collaboration, we need research, we need to ask questions, you need curiosity and wonder, creativity, innovation. These are the if you do any of this on a high stakes exam, you will fail the exam, because exams require you to give the right answer that the examiner wants that's on the mark scheme. Now, that's an issue with exams. Now, when you look at the IB, they said, look, we don't want these traditional exams because we feel like they're not testing the skills that kids need today. So they set up these very alternative assessments where you're doing, research papers, coursework, even the exams themselves, very open-ended questions where kids need to do essays, where they need to think a lot and kind of analyze and think for themselves. But then grading becomes very subjective, and you have lots of issues with, grading not being as standardized because the assessment is not standardized. And so there's this very subjective element. And I think when we're looking at Indian entrance exams where they are trying to have something very objective, standardized, and fair, they don't want something so subjective and open-ended, right? So it's actually a big question for educators and policymakers to think about. Like, we know assessments drive the system. We know we want a certain kind of assessment that teaches certain skills, but how do we make those 21st century assessments scalable, objective, and fair for students? It's really something that people haven't yet figured out.
Yeah.
Does that
True.
make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely, you're right. It's true.
I think from what I have
Yeah.
understood, colleges are, even just regular colleges in India, are having conversations about just letting children from the IB board, how do we take them in and, work with them. But yeah, with specific these competitive exams, I don't know if that conversation has started as of yet, but I think
Haven't
it
yet
will
started.
evolve. Yeah,
It will over time, I'm sure, but right now it hasn't.
it
I will
has.
say, if you want to send your kids to an Ashoka or to a Kriya or Flame, these kinds of schools love the IB. So they will be very happy to take IB students, you know. But if you do want an IIT or a straight up engineering or NEET, it's just harder. I mean, and like, I know the student who did NEET and IB together, it was just really tough for him. And he's a very, very bright kid and managed to, very successfully do them both. But that's a very small percentage of kids who can actually handle both. The IB on its own is a really, really rigorous curriculum for the
Uh,
11th.
can I ask you one last question if you have time?
Sure.
Yeah, so actually, I'll tell you the current situation what I am in. So my kid is, I don't want to take the name of the school, but then my kid is in first grade, and then she goes to class like 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then comes out of the class by 3 o'clock. Everything, lunch, assembly, the breaks, and everything is done inside the class, even the dance class and yoga, whatever. Only for PT period they come out, which is weekly twice. Is it
Hmm.
the current situation for any institution in this particular city? Or is it like I am feeling weird because I didn't study like that? I had a few out time, like outdoor activities and all this stuff, but I am feeling weird, like how this is happening. Or is this is the reason? Can I consider switching to other boards? Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, I think definitely kids, especially young kids, need time to play. They need that downtime, outdoor time, like time in nature is super important, art, sports. So I would say, if you feel like the child is overpressured and there's not much space and time for any of that, then you can look at other options for sure. And if the child feels that as well, yeah.
Yeah, so she is telling, oh no, I like my school and all this stuff. But then I feel very, like when she comes back home, she's like overly excited, overly hyper, kind of like she always jumps around. And because she was confined in one particular space, and then she comes home, she's like little bit want to play around.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, I think two pieces of advice for parents in general, listening to your question. One is, if a child is really happy at a school, I wouldn't move them against their will. I wouldn't force a child to leave a school where they're really happy, especially in primary years, because, um, ultimately we want our kids to feel comfortable and happy and have friends, and all that is really important. The second thing is, if you feel like the child is not getting, if it's, even if the child says they're happy, but then you're seeing behavior that maybe makes you wonder, are they actually happy? Do they need more time out in terms of nature and play and stuff? Then that's a call for you to make as a parent, to switch. But yeah.
But
I'm just looking,
what
I
I'm
know
asking
there are,
is that is this the situation for any institution, or it is happening only for her school? That is what I want to know, because you would have seen a lot of schools around here and
yeah.
there. So what do you
I
think
mean, there's
about it?
such a range of schools. I do think it's very normal for young kids to sometimes have meltdowns when they come home.
Yes. I was
Because
just going to say
whatever,
that. Yeah, I think
yeah,
home is a
whatever.
safe space for
uh,
the children. And once they come home, because any school, it doesn't matter the board or the thing, but any school has a particular structure, even the open-ended schools. And they're in that environment, even with the safe adults, it is just that home is home and the parent is the parent, the safest space they can be, and they just need to let loose and kind of after having gone through that routine of the day at school, when they come home, it is just that thing to, like all of us, you go to work and then you come home and then you're just like, okay, you drop your bag, you get your coffee, and you're just kind of, so to speak, chilling. The children also kind of shed that the day and kind of hang out at home, and they might have a little extra energy that they haven't expended in school, that they will come and kind of expend it. So I think that is quite um, regular, normal for, and yeah, if it has been a very structured environment, you might see more of that, the energy to be expended at home. If they haven't been given that outside time, if they haven't been given the time for physical activity, because little children need that space and need, that thing, because they're fully in their body and they need to movement, and they learn through play. So yeah, that is something to look at, right? Are they able to learn through play in the school and get enough of that activity time?
Yeah.
And kids will often behave the worst with their own parents because they know they can. It's like even adults do this, right? You'll be on really good behavior at work, and then you come home and you might snap at your spouse, or just be kind of cranky at home because you can. Your family will have to put up with it, and it's not necessarily a good thing or a right thing, but it's a very human thing. And I think kids do that a lot. They're on best behavior at school. It's exhausting. They come home and then they have meltdowns, or they, and so the mother gets to deal with a lot of that. Whereas the teacher will be like, no, the child is great. Child is, lovely at school. So it's very normal to have that to some extent. But I think as a parent, you have to make that call. If you do feel like it's too structured, there's not enough play, it doesn't feel like a good fit, then you can look at other schools. There are other schools for sure who have more. I can see we still have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to keep, but maybe we can take questions in some way down the road, Samantha. I'm not sure, because we have
because it is
leaving so many
10:20.
questions unanswered.
I
But
think just a couple of questions unanswered here, one about homeschooling and another about the last one.
yeah, and these are big topics. So maybe what we can do is, if you all can email us the questions, we can email you back a response. So you can email them to Minnie, link at treelearning.co.in, and then Samantha and I can email you responses. Minnie, you can just send a message to all participants saying if they have a question based on this session, then so we can try to get back to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that because you'll have more specific questions than we're already at 10:21, so it will be a little difficult.
And homeschooling and alternative schooling, it's going to take a long time to discuss. They are interesting and very viable alternatives, but just a long discussion. So yeah.
Yeah. So just there you go, Minnie. Thank you. The email has been shared on chat with anyone who would like to send their questions in, please. And Maya and I can get back to you on that one. Thank you so much, Maya, for this very informative session. I think it's really shed light and kind of given a lot of clarity about how things function within the school system, and what, especially more for parents to look out for their own children, to make the an informed choice for their child. So thank you so much for
Oh,
this.
and thank you. It was lovely. And thank all of you for coming in on a rainy Saturday morning and, sharing your thoughts and questions with us. Good luck with your parenting journey and your educational journey for your kids.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we'd
And
like
you
to-
can look up the TREE organization if you're more interested in teaching and teacher training. You can look up Parenting Matters. We have websites, both websites are there. Parenting Matters offers workshops for parents on parenting with connections. So do look us up. And thank you. Have a good weekend. Yeah.
And one last thing I'll just tell parents as well, TREE has a Tutor Connect program. So if you are looking for tutors, since we have a big database of teachers, many of whom want to do extra tutoring, you can also connect with us because we do match parents and tutors together as well.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah,
Good.
yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you all and have a good weekend.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.